Mark Evans, a 45-year-old entrepreneur, had built Evans Mart from the ground up. What had started as a small neighborhood shop, where he handled everything from stocking shelves to greeting customers, had grown into a thriving franchise with dozens of locations. Over the past decade, his hard work, dedication, and vision had turned Evans Mart into a household name. Yet, despite the success, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing touch with the heart of his business. In the early days, he had known every customer by name and had personally trained his employees to uphold his high standards for customer service. But as the company expanded, his role shifted from hands-on management to overseeing operations from a corporate level. Reports, financial statements, and performance metrics flooded his desk daily, but they no longer gave him a true sense of what was happening on the ground. Were his employees happy? Did they feel valued? Was the customer service philosophy he had built his business on still being upheld? These questions lingered in his mind, and no spreadsheet could provide the answers. Frustrated by the growing disconnect, Mark knew he had to do something drastic. He couldn't rely solely on second-hand information, he needed to see it for himself. That's when he decided to go undercover. Disguising himself in old jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap, he transformed into Mike, a temporary worker assigned to assist at one of his stores. He even let his hair grow out and sported a scruffy beard to complete the look. His plan was simple: observe, interact, and listen. He wanted to experience firsthand what his employees faced every day and understand the reality of life inside one of his busiest stores. Little did he know, what he was about to discover would change everything. As Mark Evans stepped out of his car and approached the Evans Mart store, a nervous excitement settled in his chest. This wasn't just any store, it was one of his busiest and most successful locations, a place that represented everything he had built over the past decade. But today, he wasn't walking in as the CEO. Today, he was just another worker. Dressed in old jeans, a faded hoodie, and a well-worn baseball cap, Mark had gone to great lengths to alter his appearance. His usually well-groomed hair was left slightly messy, and he had let a scruffy beard grow in over the past few weeks. He knew that even a hint of recognition could ruin his entire plan. His goal was to blend in, to move unnoticed among his employees and customers, and to see the store through the eyes of those who worked there every day. As he pulled open the glass door and stepped inside, the familiar hum of a busy convenience store surrounded him. The air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the distant sound of a barcode scanner beeping at the checkout. Shelves were neatly stocked with snacks, drinks, and household essentials, while employees bustled about, restocking items and assisting customers. It was a scene Mark had envisioned countless times in board meetings, but today, he wasn't here to analyze sales reports or operational efficiency. He was here to experience the store as his employees did, to see what was working, what wasn't, and most importantly, to understand how his people truly felt about their jobs. He made his way toward the store manager, a middle-aged man named Joe, who had been with the company for several years. Taking a deep breath, Mark extended his hand and introduced himself with a firm but casual voice. "Hey, I'm Mike. I was sent over by headquarters as a temp to help out for a few days." Joe, unaware of the man's true identity, nodded and smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mike. Glad to have the extra help. We've been pretty busy lately." Without hesitation, Joe handed Mark a task: stacking shelves near the front of the store. Mark nodded, eager to get to work, but as he turned toward the shelves, he couldn't ignore the strange feeling creeping into his chest. He had spent years overseeing this business from a corporate office, making decisions based on data, reports, and second-hand accounts. But standing here now, amid the steady flow of customers and employees, everything felt different. More real. More personal. He grabbed a box of canned goods and started organizing them on the shelves, all the while keeping a careful eye on his surroundings. He watched how employees interacted with customers, how they handled stressful situations, and whether they embodied the customer service values he had always emphasized. Some workers seemed engaged and enthusiastic, while others moved mechanically through their tasks. That's when he noticed a particular employee who stood out from the rest. At the checkout counter, a young cashier named Ryan greeted every customer with an easy smile. He seemed to know many of them by name, asking about their families, their days, and even cracking light-hearted jokes that made people laugh. Unlike some employees who treated their tasks as routine, Ryan was fully engaged, radiating an energy that made the store feel more welcoming. Mark found himself intrigued. There was something different about this young man, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He decided to keep a close watch on Ryan, not knowing that within hours, this cashier would do something that would leave him completely speechless. As Mark continued stacking shelves, he found himself increasingly distracted by the scene unfolding at the checkout counter. At first, he had been focused on his task, carefully arranging boxes and keeping an eye on the overall atmosphere of the store. But every time he glanced up, his attention was drawn to the young cashier, Ryan. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the other employees. Unlike the workers who merely rang up purchases with a polite but distant attitude, Ryan seemed to truly enjoy engaging with customers. He greeted each person with warmth, making them feel welcome as if they were stepping into a friend's home rather than a convenience store. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," Ryan called out with a bright smile as an elderly woman approached the counter. "How's your grandson doing? Didn't he just start kindergarten?" Mrs. Harper's eyes lit up in delight. "Oh, Ryan, you remembered." "Yes, little Tommy started this week. He was so nervous, but by the second day, he didn't even want me walking him inside." Ryan chuckled as he scanned her groceries. "Sounds like he's already on his way to being independent. Bet you're proud of him." "I really am," she said warmly. Mark observed the exchange, feeling a surprising sense of admiration. Ryan wasn't just being polite, he genuinely cared. He listened. He remembered details about people's lives that most cashiers wouldn't bother with. It was the kind of customer service Mark had always envisioned for Evans Mart, yet he rarely saw it executed so naturally. Then, something happened that made Mark stop cold. An elderly man in a tattered jacket approached the counter, placing a small loaf of bread and a carton of milk onto the register. His movements were slow, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of worn bills and loose change. Mark watched as the man carefully counted the money, his brow furrowed in concentration. He could tell the old man was doing mental calculations, hoping he had enough. A sinking feeling settled in Mark's stomach as he realized the man was struggling to pay for even the most basic essentials. Before the man could finish counting, Ryan gently spoke. "Mr. Thompson, don't worry about the total today. It's on me." The elderly man hesitated, his face showing both gratitude and reluctance. "Ryan, I can't keep letting you do this," he said softly. "You'll get in trouble." Ryan shook his head, offering the man a reassuring smile. "It's fine, I've got this," he said, quickly punching in a discount and pulling a few bills from his own pocket to cover the remaining cost. He then carefully bagged the items and handed them over. Mr. Thompson looked as though he wanted to protest further, but instead, his eyes glistened with emotion. He gave Ryan a small nod of thanks and slowly shuffled out of the store. Mark stood frozen in place, his mind racing. He had seen many things in his years running Evans Mart, good employees, hard workers, even exceptional managers. But this was different. This was a young man, earning a modest salary, willingly giving away his own money to help someone in need. A part of Mark wanted to believe it was a one-time gesture, a rare act of generosity. But as he continued watching Ryan throughout the day, he realized it wasn't. Ryan did this all the time. Whenever a customer was short on cash, he quietly covered the difference. If a struggling parent came in with their child, Ryan found ways to slip an extra snack into their bag without charging them. He never made a show of it, never drew attention to himself. He simply helped, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mark felt something tighten in his chest. He had walked into this store expecting to observe the efficiency of his business, to ensure that his employees were following policies and providing good service. Instead, he was witnessing something far more profound, a level of kindness and selflessness that he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long time, Mark wasn't thinking like a CEO. He wasn't evaluating sales numbers or employee performance metrics. Instead, he was looking at a young man who embodied the very values he had always hoped his company would stand for. And he needed to know why. Mark had come into the store expecting to observe operations, evaluate efficiency, and ensure that his company's values were being upheld. But what he found was something far more profound, something that no report or balance sheet could ever capture. Ryan wasn't just a diligent worker, he was a beacon of kindness in a world that often prioritized speed and profit over human connection. As Mark continued working under his disguise, he positioned himself strategically near the front of the store, pretending to stock shelves but keeping a careful eye on Ryan. At first, it seemed like Ryan was simply an upbeat, friendly employee, someone who greeted customers warmly and maintained a positive attitude. But as the hours passed, Mark noticed something deeper. Ryan didn't just assist customers, he connected with them. When an elderly woman came in, struggling to carry her handbag and a small basket of groceries, Ryan immediately stepped out from behind the counter. "Here, Mrs. Harper, let me help you with that," he said, gently taking the basket from her hands. The woman gave him a grateful smile. "Oh, Ryan, you're always so kind. I don't know what I'd do without you." Ryan chuckled. "Well, we can't have you carrying all that weight by yourself. Besides, I know you like to pick out the freshest apples. Got any good ones today?" As Mrs. Harper began describing how she chooses the ripest fruit, Mark could see how at ease she was, as if Ryan were a grandson rather than a cashier. Later in the day, Mark witnessed another moment that made his breath catch. A man in a wrinkled work uniform approached the counter, his movements slow and tired. He rubbed his temples as he placed a cup of coffee and a small bottle of pain reliever on the counter. "Long day, Mr. Carter?" Ryan asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. The man let out a deep sigh. "You have no idea." Without hesitation, Ryan rang up the items but discreetly applied a discount before handing over the receipt. "I hope it gets better. This one's on us today." Mr. Carter looked up, his tired eyes filled with gratitude. "Ryan. I don't know what to say." Ryan shrugged with a smile. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. Ryan's kindness wasn't performative, it wasn't done for recognition. He helped because he wanted to, because he cared. But the most touching moment came later that evening. A single father walked in with his two children, a boy and a girl, both around 7 or 8 years old. Their clothes were slightly worn, their shoes a bit scuffed, but their eyes were bright as they scanned the shelves. The little girl spotted a pack of cookies and tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we get these?" she asked hopefully. Her father hesitated. Mark could see the moment of hesitation, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes flickered between the cookies and the rest of the groceries in his basket. He was calculating, weighing the cost of a small treat against whatever budget he had left. Before the father could respond, Ryan stepped in with an easy smile. "Hey, you guys came on the right day. We're doing a special, buy one, get one free on those cookies. So go ahead and grab another one, it's on us." The father looked at Ryan, understanding passing between them. He knew there was no actual special. Ryan was covering the cost, making sure his kids didn't have to walk away disappointed. The father nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Ryan winked at the kids. "Enjoy them, all right?" The little girl beamed, hugging the pack of cookies to her chest, and the family left the store a little happier than when they had entered. Mark stood frozen, his mind racing. This wasn't about customer service. This wasn't about business strategy. This was about humanity. Ryan, a young cashier earning a modest wage, was doing more for people than any corporate policy or training manual ever could. He wasn't just scanning barcodes and handing out change, he was making life a little easier for those who needed it most. Mark's heart pounded. He had come here as an undercover boss, hoping to gain insight into his business. Instead, he had been given a glimpse into something far greater, the kind of kindness that could change lives, even in the smallest of ways. And at that moment, Mark knew that Ryan's efforts couldn't go unnoticed. Something had to be done. Mark sat across from Ryan in the break room, watching the young cashier as he absent-mindedly tapped his fingers on the table, his eyes distant. It was clear to Mark that Ryan wasn't just the kind of employee who followed the rules, he was the kind who felt things deeply. Mark's curiosity had grown even stronger after witnessing the countless small but meaningful gestures Ryan had made throughout the day. And now, Mark needed to understand why. When Mark spoke, his voice was soft, trying not to startle Ryan from his thoughts. "Ryan, I've been watching you today," he said carefully. "You do a lot more than just your job. You go out of your way to help people, paying for things, giving discounts that aren't really there. Why do you do it?" Ryan looked up, clearly caught off guard. He blinked a few times, as if the question had thrown him off his usual rhythm. For a moment, he didn't answer, and Mark thought maybe Ryan would shrug it off. But instead, Ryan's expression shifted. His posture softened, and he leaned back slightly, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask. "I guess I just do it because it's the right thing," Ryan replied with a slight smile, but his eyes didn't match the lightness of his words. There was something deeper there, something more personal. Mark leaned forward, his interest piqued. "But it's not just helping. You're doing things that don't even benefit you. It's not like you're getting anything back from those people. So why go that far?" Ryan took a slow breath, clearly trying to figure out how to explain something so fundamental to him, yet so difficult to articulate. He stared at his hands for a moment, then began to speak, his voice quieter now, as if the weight of his words was starting to settle in. "There are a lot of people who walk through those doors who are struggling, you know?" Ryan's words were simple, but the conviction behind them was unmistakable. He wasn't just talking about business, he was talking about the real lives of the people he saw every day. Some of them come in here looking like they're fine, but you can tell there's more going on underneath. The old man, Mr. Thompson. He's living on a pension now, after losing his wife. I can see the pain in his eyes every time he walks in. He doesn't have much, but he still comes in for little things, like a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. He doesn't need it, but it's like he's trying to hold on to something that feels normal." Ryan's voice trailed off as if he was reliving the moments in his mind, his eyes clouded with empathy. Mark listened closely, sensing that this wasn't the kind of thing Ryan typically shared. He was opening up in a way that made Mark feel like he had just been let in on a secret. "I've been in those shoes," Ryan continued, his voice quiet but steady. "When my dad died, I was just a kid. It was me and my little brother after that, trying to figure things out. I worked whatever I could, from delivering papers to bagging groceries. There were times when we barely had enough to get by. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, looking at bills we couldn't pay, wondering how we were going to survive the next week." Ryan's words hung in the air, heavy with the truth of his past. Mark could feel the shift in the atmosphere between them. Ryan was no longer just the smiling, energetic cashier he had been observing. He was a young man who had been shaped by hardship and had come out of it with a quiet strength. "Sometimes," Ryan continued, "when you're in a tough spot, it feels like the whole world is just spinning around you, and no one sees it. But there were a few people, strangers, really, who helped me when I was at my lowest. A teacher who paid for my lunch when I didn't have money, or a neighbor who left bags of food at our door when they knew we couldn't afford it. Those little things made all the difference to me. It didn't solve our problems, but it made me feel like I wasn't invisible." Ryan paused, his voice softening even further. "So, when I see someone else who's struggling, I know how much it can mean to just help. It's not always about fixing things. It's about showing them that someone cares, even if it's just for a moment. That someone sees them. If I can do that, if I can make someone's day a little bit easier, then I will. Because I know what it feels like to need that help, and I want to be the person who offers it, even if it's just a small thing." Mark sat in stunned silence, taking in Ryan's words. The room seemed quieter now, as if the weight of Ryan's past had filled the space between them. Mark had come to the store expecting to learn about operations, to understand how his business was running. But what he was hearing now was something entirely different. It was a revelation. Ryan wasn't just a cashier who followed the rules. He wasn't just a young man doing his job. He was a person who had lived through struggle, who had found strength and kindness, and who had decided that he wouldn't let others feel invisible the way he once did. Mark felt a deep sense of respect for Ryan, but also a sense of shame. He had spent years building his business, focusing on profits and growth, but here was Ryan, showing him what true wealth was: empathy, compassion, and the ability to make a real difference in someone's life without ever asking for anything in return. Ryan looked up then, meeting Mark's gaze for the first time since he started speaking. "I don't do it for thanks or anything," he added quickly, as if trying to downplay his own actions. "I just want to do what I can. That's all." Mark nodded slowly, his throat tight. He had witnessed something extraordinary in the way Ryan lived his life, something that went far beyond what he had expected when he walked into this store. Ryan had reminded him that kindness, even in its smallest form, had the power to change lives. And Mark knew that he would never look at his business, or his employees, the same way again. As Mark sat quietly across from Ryan in the break room, listening to the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above, a realization slowly started to dawn on him: Ryan was more than just a friendly cashier. Beneath the warm smile and enthusiastic greetings, there was a story that Mark had never expected to uncover. Ryan's kindness wasn't just an act of goodwill, it was deeply personal, shaped by a past filled with hardship and sacrifice. Ryan had already shared with Mark how he helped others, offering small acts of kindness to those who were struggling, but now Mark could sense that the young man was beginning to open up more, as if something inside him needed to be said. There was a momentary hesitation before Ryan spoke again, but this time his voice had a weight to it, something heavier than before, as though he was reaching back into a part of his life that he hadn't thought about in a while. "My dad passed away when I was just 16, Ryan began, his voice quieter than usual. Mark noticed a subtle shift in Ryan's expression as the words left his lips. The vibrant, energetic young man sitting across from him seemed to deflate for a moment, his shoulders slumping slightly as he relived the painful memory. The casual tone of his words didn't match the depth of the emotion in his eyes. Mark could tell that Ryan was trying to hold it together, but there was a vulnerability that wasn't easily concealed. "After that, everything changed," Ryan continued, his voice tinged with a quiet sadness. "It wasn't just the loss of my dad, it was everything else that came with it. Suddenly, I had to figure out how to take care of my little brother and myself. My mom, she was struggling too. I was the one who had to step up, even though I didn't know how to. I had to be the one who was strong, even when I was scared." Mark's heart tightened at hearing this. He hadn't realized the depth of Ryan's burdens, the weight he'd been carrying all these years. Mark imagined the young Ryan, not as the energetic cashier he saw in front of him now, but as a teenager, fragile, uncertain, and thrust into a role far beyond his years. It must have felt like the ground was constantly shifting beneath him, and yet, Ryan had found a way to endure. Ryan's eyes looked distant as he spoke, as if he was seeing a memory unfold before him. "I had to work all kinds of odd jobs to help us get by," he said, the words flowing more easily now, though Mark could still hear the strain beneath them. "I delivered papers, worked at fast food joints, did whatever I could to bring in some cash. But I wasn't just trying to make money, I was trying to make sure my brother didn't feel the weight of everything that was going on. I didn't want him to feel like we were sinking, so I kept it together for him, even when it felt like I was falling apart on the inside." Mark's mind raced as he tried to process what Ryan was telling him. The thought of a 16-year-old having to take on so much responsibility was almost incomprehensible. Ryan had essentially grown up overnight, forced into a situation where childhood was sacrificed for survival. And yet, despite all of that, Ryan had never lost his sense of compassion. Ryan shifted in his seat, his gaze moving to the floor, as if he was hesitant to share more. "There were times when things were really tough," he continued, his voice quiet but firm. "There were nights when we barely had enough to eat, and I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at bills we couldn't pay, wondering how we were going to get through the week. I didn't have the luxury of being a kid anymore. I had to think about survival. But I didn't want my brother to see that. I wanted him to feel safe, to feel like he could still be a kid, even if everything around us was falling apart. Ryan's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the sacrifice he had made. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. It was hard to imagine the toll that such a young person would bear, all the while trying to protect someone they loved from the harsh realities of life. Ryan's ability to put his own needs aside in favor of his brother's was nothing short of heroic. I did what I had to do to make sure my brother had what he needed, Ryan went on, his voice growing even softer now, filled with an almost haunting tenderness. But there were other people along the way who helped us, too. Neighbors who knew we were struggling would drop off bags of groceries. A teacher who saw that I was struggling with school and would sneak me lunch money when no one was looking. Those little things, they meant everything to me. They made me feel like we weren't invisible, like someone cared about us. Mark could feel his heart swell with emotion as he listened to Ryan's story. Here was a young man who had been dealt an incredibly difficult hand in life, and yet he had chosen to carry the burden with a quiet dignity. Instead of succumbing to bitterness or anger, Ryan had let those experiences shape him into someone who understood the pain of others and wanted to help however he could. Ryan's gaze lifted from the floor, meeting Mark's eyes for the first time in the conversation. "I don't do it for thanks," he said quickly, his voice almost a whisper. "I just want to make a difference, even if it's just a small one. If I can help someone the way people helped me, then it's worth it. That's all." Mark sat back, his mind racing. He had come into this store expecting to learn about his business, to understand how his employees were performing, but what he was hearing now was something far more profound. Ryan wasn't just an employee who gave a little extra, he was a person who had endured unimaginable struggles and, instead of letting those struggles break him, he had chosen to use them as fuel to help others. Mark felt a deep sense of admiration for Ryan, but also a quiet sadness. He realized how little he knew about the people who worked for him, their lives, their struggles, their dreams. Mark had been so focused on profits, on expansion, that he hadn't taken the time to understand the heart of his business, the people who made it all possible. Ryan's story was a wake-up call. He wasn't just an employee, he was a reflection of the kind of person Mark wanted his company to support and uplift. And Mark knew, in that moment, that his perspective had shifted forever. It wasn't enough to just run a business. He needed to make sure that those who worked for him were truly seen, truly valued, not just as employees, but as human beings with stories, struggles, and dreams of their own. Ryan had taught him that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, those that may seem insignificant to others, can make the most profound impact on someone's life. Mark knew he would never look at Ryan, or any of his employees, the same way again. As the store's energy shifted from the bustle of the day to the quiet calm of closing time, Mark stood behind a shelf, his heart pounding. His mind raced with thoughts, knowing the time had finally come. The undercover operation was over, and the truth needed to come to light. There was an undeniable weight on his shoulders as he reflected on everything he had learned. He had witnessed acts of kindness, heard stories of hardship, and, most importantly, saw the incredible dedication his employees showed. It was more than just an average day at work, it was a revelation, a moment that would change everything. Mark felt the tension building up inside him, a cocktail of nerves and excitement. The employees were wrapping up their shifts, unaware that this ordinary night was about to take an extraordinary turn. Mark had spent the past few days observing their actions, quietly taking mental notes, and gathering more information than he could have ever gotten through reports alone. The true essence of his business, the culture, and the spirit of the company was right here, in these small moments. He had seen enough. It was time to pull off the mask and reveal the truth, who he was and why he had been there. As Mark walked toward the break room, the door to the back of the store where the employees gathered at the end of their shifts, his pulse quickened. He had planned everything meticulously, yet nothing could prepare him for the real-time tension of what was about to unfold. The room was filled with chatter as the staff laughed and talked, unaware of the surprise coming their way. Mark took a deep breath, adjusted the hoodie he'd been wearing to blend in, and readied himself for the moment. The store manager, Joe, was calling everyone together for a quick wrap-up meeting. It was just another end-of-shift routine to them, but to Mark, this would be the moment that would forever change how these employees saw their work, their leader, and themselves. As they gathered, Mark could feel a surge of anticipation rise within him. He knew this was a crucial moment, and he wanted to make every word count. Once the employees were all present, Mark stood in front of the group, looking around the room. There was a collective pause in the conversation as everyone turned their attention toward him. It was as though the room had frozen. Their eyes, curious and questioning, were focused on this man they thought they knew, Mike, the temporary worker who had been there the past few days. Mark took a moment to look at their faces, trying to read their expressions. Some seemed intrigued, others confused. But all of them were waiting for what would come next. "Hey everyone," Mark began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm Mark Evans, the CEO of Evans Mart." There was a long, stunned silence. For a second, it seemed as though the world around him had stopped. He could feel the eyes of his employees widening in disbelief. The impact of his words took a moment to sink in. The transformation of the room's atmosphere was palpable as the realization hit them. This was not a prank. The man standing in front of them was the very person who had built the company they worked for. And he was standing here, not as the powerful CEO but as one of them, a temporary worker trying to understand the truth about his business. The surprise was evident on every face. Mark allowed the silence to stretch on for a moment, giving his words the time they needed to settle in. The employees glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. Ryan, in particular, seemed frozen, his eyes wide as he tried to process the revelation. Mark could practically hear his thoughts, how could this be? How did I not recognize him, After the shock faded slightly, Mark continued, his voice full of sincerity. I've been working here undercover for the past few days. I wanted to see firsthand what's going on in my stores, how my employees are treated, and how our values are reflected in the day-to-day operations. And let me tell you, it's been an eye-opening experience. The employees exchanged looks, their confusion slowly turning to curiosity. Mark wasn't in any rush to explain everything all at once. He let his words linger, watching as their faces shifted from bewilderment to intrigue. They were still processing the information, trying to understand what this meant for them. Turning his gaze toward Ryan, Mark felt a sense of admiration swell in his chest. The young man had no idea what was coming, but Mark couldn't wait to share the truth with him. "Ryan," Mark said softly, his voice tinged with respect, "I want to talk to you for a moment." Ryan, who had been standing toward the back of the group, stepped forward hesitantly. His brow furrowed, confusion still evident on his face. He was clearly unsure whether he was in trouble or being rewarded. But Mark knew what he had witnessed in the last few days, something extraordinary that no one else had seen. This was the moment to acknowledge it. "Ryan," Mark began, his voice growing warmer, "I've been observing your work, and I have to tell you, I'm absolutely blown away. Your kindness, your dedication to helping customers, it's something rare. You go above and beyond, even when no one is watching. You've made a real difference in people's lives, and I want you to know that I see it." Ryan stood frozen, his eyes wide. He opened his mouth as though to say something, but the words seemed to fail him. He had never expected this kind of recognition. Mark could see the wheels turning in his head, was this real? Was he really talking to the CEO right now, Mark smiled, his gaze never leaving Ryan's. "And that's exactly why I'm making you an offer. Effective immediately, I'm promoting you to a management position. You'll get a significant raise, and you'll have more responsibility to help lead our team." Ryan's jaw dropped. The shock in his eyes was evident. He didn't seem to know how to react, his face flushed with disbelief, and he stammered, I didn't do this for any reward. I just wanted to help." Mark's voice softened with understanding. "And that's precisely why you deserve this. You've done it from the heart, Ryan. That's what matters. You've shown the values that we strive for here at Evans Mart." But Mark wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure that Ryan knew just how much he was valued, that his sacrifices hadn't gone unnoticed. "On top of the promotion, I'm going to help you with something personal. I want to pay for your brother's education, and I'm also setting up a fund to support employees who are facing difficult times. I've seen the weight you've been carrying, and I want to help lighten that burden." Ryan's eyes welled with tears, and he stepped back slightly, overwhelmed with emotion. He struggled to find the right words, but they wouldn't come. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. Mark placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his voice steady and full of empathy. "You don't have to say anything, Ryan. You've already said everything through your actions. That's what's truly important." The room erupted into applause, with some employees visibly moved, wiping their eyes as they clapped for Ryan. The moment wasn't just about a promotion, it was a celebration of kindness, empathy, and the deep impact one person could have on the world around them. Ryan, still stunned, looked at Mark with gratitude, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I never expected this. I never did any of this to get anything in return. I just wanted to make a difference." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And that's exactly why you're deserving of this. You've already made a difference in ways that go beyond what words can describe." In that moment, Mark realized something profound. The true strength of his company didn't lie in the numbers or the bottom line, it lay in the people, their integrity, and their willingness to make the world a better place, one small act at a time. And now, with his reveal, he had ensured that Ryan and all his employees would never feel invisible again. They were seen, they were valued, and they were part of something much bigger than just a business. They were part of a community that cared. As the days passed, Mark found himself continually moved by the young cashier, Ryan. From the moment he had first observed Ryan's interactions with the customers, he was struck by how different Ryan was from the typical employee. It was clear that Ryan wasn't just doing his job to earn a paycheck, he was deeply invested in the people he served, and his actions seemed to come from a place of true kindness and empathy. Mark had seen Ryan go out of his way to help customers in need, even when it meant putting his own money on the line. One instance in particular stuck with Mark, when Ryan had quietly told Mr. Thompson, an elderly regular, that the bread and milk he was purchasing were on the house. Mr. Thompson had hesitated, trying to refuse, but Ryan had simply smiled and insisted. Mark had watched from a distance, amazed at how naturally Ryan gave of himself, without hesitation or expectation of anything in return. It wasn't just a one-time act. Over the course of Mark's time undercover, he had witnessed similar acts of kindness over and over again. As Mark continued to observe, he began to realize that Ryan's actions weren't driven by a desire for praise or recognition. In fact, Ryan seemed to go out of his way to keep these acts quiet, often telling the customers to keep it between them or to not worry about the small gestures he made. This wasn't about standing out or looking good, it was about making a difference, however small. And it wasn't just the customers who benefited. Ryan's colleagues, too, felt his warmth and generosity. He was always willing to lend a hand when someone needed it, even if it meant sacrificing his own time or energy. But it wasn't just Ryan's kindness that left an impression on Mark. As Mark spoke to other employees, he learned more about the personal struggles that Ryan faced. He had come from a tough background, losing his father at a young age and stepping into the role of caretaker for his younger brother. It was a heavy burden to bear, and yet Ryan had never let it affect his work or his relationships with others. He worked tirelessly, rarely taking a day off, and always gave more of himself than was expected. As Mark heard these stories, his admiration for Ryan only grew. One particular conversation with Bill, a fellow employee in the stockroom, made Mark realize the depth of Ryan's sacrifices. Bill spoke with genuine concern about Ryan, describing how the young man had been supporting his brother for years, often working multiple jobs and stretching himself thin. Bill was worried that Ryan had so much on his plate, yet he never complained or asked for anything in return. He was always the first to step up and help someone, no matter how much he had going on in his own life. Mark felt a deep sense of guilt for not realizing earlier just how much Ryan had been carrying. Here was a young man, so full of energy and compassion, who had silently been bearing the weight of his family's struggles while still managing to show kindness to others. Mark couldn't help but think that someone like Ryan deserved to be celebrated, not just for his work ethic, but for his resilience and selflessness. Mark had gone undercover to learn more about his employees and his business, but what he had discovered went beyond what he had ever expected. By the time Mark decided to reveal his identity to the team, he was already feeling a deep sense of gratitude for Ryan. He knew that he had to do something to show the young man how much his actions had meant. Mark realized that recognizing Ryan wasn't just about offering him a promotion or a raise, it was about acknowledging the heart behind everything Ryan did, and giving him the recognition he so rightfully deserved. When Mark finally gathered the team and revealed his true identity, he saw the surprise and shock on their faces, but his gaze was firmly locked on Ryan. Ryan's expression was one of disbelief, and Mark could see the confusion and surprise in his eyes. Mark addressed the entire team, but his words were especially meant for Ryan. He spoke about how Ryan's kindness and generosity had left a lasting impact on him, and how it had reminded him of the values he wanted his business to uphold. He talked about how Ryan had gone above and beyond without ever expecting anything in return, and how that kind of selflessness was something to be admired. The moment Mark announced that Ryan would be promoted to a management position, with a significant raise, was a turning point. Ryan was overwhelmed, speechless even. He had never expected anything like this, and Mark could see the mix of emotions in his eyes: surprise, gratitude, and perhaps even a bit of confusion. Ryan's reaction was humble as always, insisting that he hadn't done any of it for the recognition or the reward. But Mark knew that this wasn't about a reward. It was about showing Ryan that his efforts hadn't gone unnoticed, that his actions had mattered and had made a difference. Mark also made a special offer to help Ryan's brother with his education, something Ryan had never even dreamed of asking for. Mark could see the shock and gratitude in Ryan's eyes, and he knew in that moment that this gesture wasn't just about giving money, it was about showing Ryan that he was cared for, that someone noticed his sacrifices, and that he wasn't alone in this journey. As the days went on, the entire atmosphere at the store shifted. Employees felt more motivated, inspired by Ryan's example, and customers felt more valued, knowing that they were being served by someone who genuinely cared. Mark had set out on his undercover mission to learn more about his business, but what he discovered was something far more valuable: a reminder of the true meaning of leadership and the importance of recognizing the heart behind the work. Ryan's actions had changed the way Mark viewed his business and his employees. It wasn't just about profits or efficiency anymore, it was about people and how deeply their actions could impact the lives of others. Mark knew that this one revelation would shape his leadership from that moment forward. Ryan had reminded him that the true strength of a company lies in the hearts of its people. The experience of going undercover at Evans Mart and witnessing Ryan's selflessness had a profound impact on Mark, both personally and professionally. Initially, Mark had set out on his undercover mission to gain insight into the day-to-day operations of his business. He hoped to understand how his employees were performing and to get a clearer sense of the atmosphere in his stores. However, what he discovered in the process far surpassed his expectations and completely reshaped his perspective on leadership and business. Mark's first major realization was the incredible importance of the people behind the business. Before going undercover, he had been focused on numbers, reports, and growth. Like many CEOs, he had been distant from the daily interactions between employees and customers, believing that as long as the company was performing well financially, everything was in order. But the deeper Mark got into his undercover role, the more he realized that the heart of the business wasn't in spreadsheets or financial metrics, it was in the employees and their relationships with customers. He saw how Ryan's kindness and dedication to others had a ripple effect, not just improving the customers' experiences, but also influencing the morale of the entire team. Mark's experience taught him that success wasn't only about expanding and increasing profits. It was about fostering a culture where employees felt valued and supported, and where their actions could create meaningful, positive change in the community. He had witnessed firsthand how Ryan's small, selfless acts, helping customers in need, paying for groceries, and offering assistance without being asked, had transformed the environment at that particular store. Customers were not just receiving service, they were receiving care and compassion, and it made a lasting impact. The store wasn't just another convenience store, it had become a place where people felt seen, valued, and appreciated. Beyond the store's immediate success, Mark also recognized the need to improve the way he connected with his employees. After hearing about Ryan's personal struggles, Mark realized how disconnected he had become from the lives of the people working for him. Ryan had been carrying the weight of his family's needs and working tirelessly to support his brother, all while still showing up with a positive attitude and helping others. Mark felt a sense of guilt that he had not known this before. He realized how easy it was to overlook the individual stories behind the employees, assuming they were all just numbers on a report. The reality was that each employee had their own challenges and aspirations, and it was vital for Mark to make a more genuine effort to understand their lives outside of work. The most significant change, however, was in Mark's approach to leadership. Before his undercover experience, Mark had always believed that leadership was about setting the direction for the company, making big decisions, and driving profits. He had relied heavily on the reports and data to gauge success, but the undercover experience made him realize that effective leadership wasn't about sitting in an office and making high-level decisions from behind a desk. True leadership, he learned, was about connecting with people on a personal level, showing empathy, and being present in the lives of the employees. Mark's decision to reward Ryan with a promotion and raise wasn't just a response to Ryan's hard work, it was a direct result of his understanding that leadership should be about recognizing and uplifting those who go above and beyond for the company, not just those who perform well on paper. Mark had seen that Ryan's kindness and generosity were not just good for business, they were an embodiment of the values he wanted for Evans Mart. By promoting Ryan, Mark wanted to demonstrate that acts of kindness and dedication were just as valuable as meeting sales targets or increasing profits. Mark also took steps to ensure that the lessons he had learned would have a lasting impact on Evans Mart. He set up a fund to support employees in need, a move inspired by Ryan's own willingness to help others despite his own financial struggles. Mark also made it a priority to visit the stores more regularly, not just for business assessments but to interact with employees and show that he genuinely cared about their well-being. He understood now that employees who felt supported, appreciated, and understood would be more motivated to go above and beyond in their roles. The undercover experience ultimately shifted Mark's approach to business in profound ways. He now knew that leadership was not just about directing the company toward growth, but about leading with empathy, showing recognition, and being present for the people who made the company what it was. Mark's experience with Ryan had reminded him of the human aspect of business, the stories, the struggles, and the generosity that lay beneath the surface. As he moved forward with Evans Mart, he knew that his leadership would be driven by these values, not just the pursuit of profits. Mark's experience with Ryan was more than a moment of recognition, it was a turning point that forever altered his understanding of leadership and success. It had shown him that the real strength of a business lies in the people behind it and that by valuing and supporting them, the business could thrive in ways that went far beyond financial gain. It was a lesson in humanity, compassion, and the power of recognizing the efforts of others. And for Mark, it was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his career. Mark Evans had always been a highly driven CEO. His ambition and vision had turned Evans Mart into a flourishing business with numerous stores spread across the region. However, as his company grew, he became increasingly disconnected from its day-to-day operations. While he had access to reports, statistics, and growth charts, he yearned for a deeper understanding of the people behind the success of his stores, the employees who made his vision a reality. And so, he decided to take matters into his own hands in an unexpected and transformative way, by going undercover. What started as an attempt to gain insight into the inner workings of Evans Mart soon became an eye-opening experience that would reshape his view of leadership and success. Mark's undercover journey, where he spent time working side by side with his employees, revealed more than just inefficiencies or operational issues, it exposed the beating heart of his business. The kindness, compassion, and dedication of people like Ryan, one of the cashiers at his third store, left an indelible mark on Mark. Ryan's selfless actions, helping customers in need without asking for anything in return, opened Mark's eyes to the true power of human connection in the workplace. Ryan was more than just a hard-working employee, he was someone who deeply understood the struggles of others. Despite his own challenging circumstances, having lost his father at a young age and taking on the responsibility of caring for his younger brother, Ryan chose to help others rather than focus solely on his own problems. His decision to pay for customers' small purchases, offer discounts, or even slip an extra item into someone's bag showed Mark that his employees didn't just work for a paycheck, they were invested in the well-being of the community they served. Ryan, in particular, embodied the values Mark had always hoped for in his company: kindness, empathy, and a sense of social responsibility. Mark was struck by the depth of Ryan's generosity, but it wasn't until he spoke with Bill, an older stockroom worker, that the full weight of Ryan's life circumstances became clear. Ryan, who seemed to radiate positivity and energy, was carrying the heavy burden of grief and responsibility. Mark realized that, despite Ryan's personal struggles, he was constantly giving to others, trying to make their lives better in whatever small way he could. The fact that no one seemed to be looking out for Ryan, who was struggling silently, tugged at Mark's heart. It was then that he understood the true power of empathy and the importance of recognizing the quiet heroes in his workforce. The decision to reveal his true identity to Ryan and the rest of the team was a pivotal moment for Mark. After days of working undercover, Mark had seen enough. He understood the impact Ryan was making on his customers and colleagues, and he knew that he could no longer remain anonymous. When he finally gathered the team at the end of his undercover stint and removed his cap to reveal his true identity, the room fell silent. Ryan, stunned and surprised, had no idea that the person he had been working alongside was none other than the CEO himself. Mark's announcement was not just a revelation of his identity, but also of the immense respect and admiration he had for Ryan. Mark praised Ryan for his extraordinary generosity and commitment to others, acknowledging that his actions had not gone unnoticed. He recognized the value of employees like Ryan who went beyond the call of duty to make a real difference in people's lives. And in a powerful gesture of gratitude, Mark promoted Ryan to a management position with a significant raise, ensuring that his hard work and compassion were rewarded. But that wasn't all. Mark also made the life-changing decision to pay for Ryan's brother's education and set up a fund to support employees in need across all Evans Mart locations. Ryan's eyes welled up with tears as he tried to process the kindness and generosity Mark had extended to him. But what truly stood out was Ryan's humble response. He insisted that he never helped others with the expectation of receiving anything in return, it was simply the right thing to do. For Mark, this was the defining moment of his entire undercover experience. It reaffirmed that the true value of a person isn't measured by what they can gain, but by what they are willing to give. From that moment forward, Evans Mart underwent a transformation. Mark made it a point to visit his stores regularly, not just as a CEO, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people working there. His personal involvement in the company created a ripple effect. Employees felt valued and inspired to perform their best, knowing they had the support and recognition of their leader. Customers noticed the change too. There was a warmth and authenticity in the service they received, a reflection of the care and dedication that had been infused into the culture of Evans Mart. Mark's undercover experience not only gave him a new perspective on the importance of employee well-being but also showed him the significance of human connections and business. He had entered the store seeking to understand the operational dynamics, but what he found was far more valuable. It wasn't about improving sales or streamlining processes, it was about fostering an environment where kindness, empathy, and mutual respect were prioritized. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the heart of any successful business lies in its people. Whether you're a CEO, a manager, or an employee, it's crucial to recognize the value of compassion and empathy in the workplace. As leaders, it's our responsibility to not only manage operations but to care for the people who drive those operations forward. We need to ask ourselves, how well do we really know our employees? Are we genuinely invested in their well-being, or are we just focused on numbers and bottom lines? If you are in a leadership role, take the time to connect with your employees on a deeper level. Listen to their concerns, understand their struggles, and celebrate their successes. The impact of these small, thoughtful actions can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond the workplace. Create an environment where people feel valued, supported, and recognized. When employees feel seen and appreciated, they are more likely to invest themselves fully in their work, creating a positive and productive work culture. If you're an employee, remember that your actions matter. Your kindness, generosity, and work ethic can make a huge difference in the lives of those around you. Even when you're facing challenges of your own, the simple act of helping others can create a sense of community and belonging that elevates everyone. Let Mark's story inspire you to make a positive change in your workplace. Whether you're in a leadership position or not, take the time to acknowledge the people around you. Share this story with others and encourage them to do the same. Together, we can create workplaces that foster kindness, understanding, and mutual respect. By embracing these values, we can all contribute to building a world where businesses thrive not just on profits, but on the positive impact they have on the lives of their people.